What would you do if a single gavel strike shattered your entire life, fining you $500 million without a trial? Picture the suffocating weight of that moment, the air thick with judgment, as Congresswoman Lena Brooks faced a courtroom conspiracy so sinister it could unravel the very fabric of justice. In a nation still scarred by racial inequity and systemic betrayal, Lena, a black congresswoman, dared to expose a truth so raw that even the judge broke down in tears. What happens when one woman's courage ignites a firestorm of reform? Step into her story, a tale of resilience, betrayal, and the unyielding power of truth, brought to you by Daily Narrated Stories, where we uncover the narratives that inspire and uplift. The courtroom drama that unfolded wasn't just a legal battle. It was a seismic shift in the fight for fairness in America. It all began on a frigid morning in the Richmond federal courthouse, where the tension was palpable, the stakes sky high. As Lena Brooks stood against a system designed to silence her, you're now in her shoes. Imagine the choice. Fight back with every ounce of strength, risking it all to expose the corruption, or step back, regroup, and seek justice another way? Which path would you take? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And while you're here, please subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us as we bring these powerful stories to life. Every chair in the Richmond federal courthouse was occupied, every corner buzzing with anticipation. Reporters clutched their notepads, cameras poised to capture a downfall. Not just any downfall, but the public unraveling of a black congresswoman who had risen too quickly, spoken too loudly, and refused to bow to the establishment's unwritten rules. The murmurs hushed as the heavy oak doors groaned open, revealing Judge Nathaniel Harper in his flowing black robe, his gaze sharp, his lips a thin line of determination. He didn't acknowledge the crowd, his focus singular as he took his seat at the bench. The clock struck 9 a.m., and the city held its breath. At the defendant's table, Congresswoman Lena Brooks sat with a spine of steel, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes fixed on the judge with a quiet, unshakable resolve. Her charcoal blazer was simple, but her presence was magnetic, commanding the room's attention without a word. The faint scent of polished wood and stale coffee lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She didn't flinch as Judge Harper lifted his gavel, adjusted his glasses, and began to speak. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on his every word, the tension so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on their shoulders. Then came the crushing blow. This court finds the defendant, Representative Lena Brooks, guilty of misleading federal agencies and charitable donors under the framework of the Future Hope program. Judge Harper declared, his voice cold and unyielding. The misconduct is severe, the impact profound. Therefore, this court imposes a civil fine of $500 million to be paid within 90 days. The room erupted in gasps, raw and unrestrained. $500 million, a fine that dwarfed the economies of small nations? Cameras flashed like lightning, their harsh light reflecting off the polished floors, while reporters scribbled furiously, capturing history as it unfolded. Even the court stenographer paused, her fingers hovering over the keys, her breath caught in her throat. But Lena remained still, her face a mask of composure. Only the subtle rise and fall of her chest betrayed the storm within her, a storm of fear, anger, and determination swirling beneath her calm exterior. She glanced at her attorney, Mara Ellison, giving a faint nod, a silent signal that spoke volumes. This is far from over. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the stakes, but her eyes burned with a fire that refused to be extinguished. Judge Harper, his expression unreadable, offered no further reasoning. He struck the gavel once more, the sharp crack echoing through the room like a gunshot, and called for a recess. In that moment, the narrative seemed set. The mighty had fallen, or so they believed. Long before Lena Brooks ever stepped into Congress, she walked into courtrooms with nothing but a worn briefcase and a cup of diner coffee, the kind that burned your throat but kept you sharp. a civil rights lawyer by trade. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege. She was forged in struggle, in truth, in communities that politicians only visited for photo ops. Her memory stretched back to her early days, to a childhood marked by the sting of injustice. She could still hear her father's voice, strained with exhaustion, as he explained why they had to leave their home after a foreclosure notice arrived, a notice she now kept framed on her wall as a reminder of why she fought. That memory fueled her, a quiet fire that had burned since she was a girl watching her parents struggle to keep their dignity in a system that seemed designed to strip it away. Her career began in the dimly lit offices of a small legal aid clinic, where the air smelled of old paper and desperation. There, she took on cases others wouldn't touch. Families facing unjust evictions, workers denied fair wages, communities ravaged by discriminatory policing. She remembered one case in particular, a young mother, barely 20, who had been wrongfully evicted from her apartment in the dead of winter. Lena had sat with her on a sagging couch in a cramped shelter, the woman's baby asleep in her arms, as she recounted how the landlord had changed the locks without notice, leaving her belongings on the snowy curb. Lena's chest had tightened with a mix of rage and sorrow as she promised to fight for her. She won that case, securing not just a home for the mother, but a precedent that protected countless others. It was the kind of victory that didn't make headlines but changed lives, and it was why Lena kept going. Her reputation grew not through charm or connections, but through sheer grit. There was the time she raced to a live legal debate that would cement her name as a formidable thinker. Her car broke down 3 blocks from the studio, the engine sputtering in the cold, the dashboard lights flickering like a dying star. The icy wind bit at her face as she ran the rest of the way in scuffed pumps, her breath coming in sharp, frosty puffs. She arrived with seconds to spare, her heart pounding, her notes crumpled in her hand. Yet she outshone her opponents with a grace that left one panelist calling her a storm in a skirt. She laughed about that for weeks, the nickname a badge of honor she wore with pride. Lena built her career by tackling the cases others avoided, making enemies by holding the powerful to account. Not at cocktail parties, but at protests that echoed with the voices of the unheard. She could still feel the heat of the sun on her skin from a rally in Birmingham, where she stood shoulder to shoulder with factory workers demanding fair wages, their chants ringing in her ears. She didn't network at fundraisers. She made headlines at rallies, her voice cutting through the noise like a beacon for those who had been ignored too long. When she finally claimed a seat in Congress, it wasn't handed to her. She demanded it, refusing to be invisible, her resolve as unyielding as the steel in her spine. So, yes, the courtroom expected her to crumble under the weight of the fine, but they didn't know the Lena who once quoted Sojourner Truth to a hostile panel, her voice steady as she declared, "Ain't I a woman?" They didn't know the Lena who kept her father's foreclosure notice as a talisman, a reminder of the stakes. They hadn't met the woman who walked into every battle prepared to lose everything except her integrity. Her name a banner she would never let fall. The media swarmed like sharks, each outlet vying for the most salacious headline. Stories were drafted before the hearing even started. Rising star caught in charity scandal. The downfall of Brooks. Outside, pundits predicted the end of her political career, their voices dripping with a mix of glee and disdain. Inside, whispers slithered through the crowd like venom. She's done. Corrupt like the rest. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't see the fire in Lena's eyes, the way her hands, though clasped, trembled with the weight of what she carried. Not guilt, but purpose. Then there was Victor Steele, the federal prosecutor with a flair for drama. Perfect suit, arrogant grin, and a voice that dripped with authority. To the public, he was the crusader, the man who would topple another crooked politician. He stood across the courtroom, poised like a predator ready to strike, his polished shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But he didn't realize that his target wasn't prey. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a trap, the kind the system had honed for decades. Target a black leader with courage, tarnish her name, and let the mob celebrate her ruin. Lena could feel the weight of history in that moment. the ghosts of countless others who had been dragged through the same mud, their voices silenced by a system that feared their strength. This time, they chose the wrong woman. Lena Brooks didn't come to court to surrender. She came to dismantle the lie and rise from the ashes, unshaken. The courtroom was still reeling from the $500 million fine when Lena leaned toward her attorney, Mara Ellison. Her expression remained steady, but her voice, soft as a whisper, carried the weight of a thunderclap. "Let's show them what they tried to bury," she murmured, her words barely audible over the hum of the room, the faint rustle of papers, and the distant cough of a spectator. The microphone at the defense table caught just enough, amplifying her resolve for those close enough to hear. Mara didn't react with surprise or hesitation. Instead, she reached under the table and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope, its edges frayed from handling. The paper yellowed as if it had been hidden away for years. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as if she held a sacred relic, a piece of truth that could shift the tides of history. The room seemed to hold its breath. Reporters paused mid-tweet, their fingers hovering over screens. Pens froze in midair, and the tension tightened like a coiled spring, ready to snap. Even Judge Harper, whose face had been a mask of stone, leaned forward slightly, his curiosity unspoken but evident in the slight arch of his brow, the way his fingers twitched toward the gavel. He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. "Proceed." Mara arose slowly, smoothing her blazer with a steady hand, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor as she approached the bench. Her steps were measured, each one a quiet declaration of purpose, the envelope held like a weapon of truth. She didn't slam it down or play to the crowd, though the weight of every eye in the room bore down on her. She placed it gently before Judge Harper, her voice steady as she spoke with quiet authority. "Your Honor, before any penalty is enforced, the defense requests permission to submit newly discovered evidence. Evidence that we believe fundamentally changes the foundation of this case." Judge Harper, ever the skeptic, narrowed his eyes, the lines on his face deepening with suspicion. "Miss Ellison, discovery is closed. The court has ruled. What could possibly warrant this interruption?" His tone was firm, his words clipped, but Mara's calm demeanor held him in check, her gaze unwavering as she met his stare. Her response cut through the air like a blade, sharp and unyielding. "Because, Your Honor, this evidence was intentionally withheld from us. We received it only 4 days ago from a whistleblower within the Department of Justice." The room exploded in murmurs, a wave of shock rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. A few reporters stood, unable to contain their reaction, their notebooks forgotten as they whispered to one another. Victor Steele's head whipped toward Mara, his smug grin vanishing, replaced by a look of raw panic, his eyes wide with the realization that his carefully constructed narrative was about to unravel. Judge Harper leaned back, the envelope now a live grenade on his bench, its presence a silent threat to everything he thought he knew. He didn't touch it immediately. Instead, he studied Mara, searching for any hint of deception, any crack in her composure. Finding none, he carefully opened the envelope, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. Inside were documents that told a damning story, each page a piece of a puzzle that had been hidden for far too long. The first was a memo from the DOJ's internal audit team, dated months before any charges were filed against Lena. It confirmed that the discrepancies in the Future Hope program were due to a third-party software error. Misclassifications, not fraud, not Lena's doing. The ink on the page seemed to scream the truth, the words a stark contrast to the lies that had been fed to the public. The next page was worse, an internal DOJ email chain, the kind of correspondence that was never meant to see the light of day. One message read, "No evidence Brooks acted with intent. Proceeding risks political fallout." Another urged, "Delay disclosure. Optics matter." The courtroom froze, the silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on every soul in the room. Judge Harper's hands gripped the documents, his composure fraying with each page, his knuckles whitening as he turned to the next. These weren't rumors. They were verified, signed, and dated, each signature a nail in the coffin of the prosecution's case. The truth had been locked away while Lena's reputation was torn apart, her name dragged through the mud for the sake of political expediency. Mara stepped back, letting the evidence speak, her role not to argue but to reveal. Across the aisle, Victor Steele looked like he might collapse, his co-counsel staring blankly ahead, their faces pale as the reality of their betrayal sank in. The betrayal wasn't just legal. It was a moral failing, a stain on the very justice system they were sworn to uphold. Lena had been branded a criminal, a fraud, a liar. Now, it was clear she'd been framed by a system that valued control over justice, a machine that had chewed up countless others before her and would do so again if left unchecked. Lena didn't move, didn't gloat, her stillness a stark contrast to the chaos around her. For the first time that day, she wasn't the one on trial, the system was. And for the first time in years, Judge Nathaniel Harper looked like a man on the verge of breaking under the weight of his own bench. He sat still, but his eyes told a different story, a storm of emotion swirling behind them as he grappled with the truth. Behind the bench, cloaked in authority, he pored over the whistleblower documents, each page eroding the foundation of the prosecution's case. His fingers, steady through decades of rulings, now trembled slightly, the faintest quiver betraying the turmoil within. His jaw clenched, a flicker of anguish crossing his face as he reached the final page, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't just professional shame, it was a deep, moral wound, the kind that cut to the core of a man who had dedicated his life to the law. The DOJ hadn't just overlooked evidence. They'd weaponized lies, calculating the optics of convicting a black congresswoman who challenged the status quo. Judge Harper's breath caught, a subtle crack in his stoic facade, the sound so faint it was almost drowned out by the rustle of papers in the gallery. He closed the folder with deliberate care and looked out at the courtroom, not as a judge, but as a man confronting a broken system, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The room waited, motionless, the air thick with anticipation. Lena's gaze held steady, her fight no longer just for herself, but for every voice silenced by those in power, every soul who had been crushed by a system that valued power over principle. Victor Steele was unraveling, his once pristine facade crumbling like a sandcastle in a storm. The prosecutor who had entered the courtroom with the swagger of a future governor now looked like a man caught in a nightmare, his hands fumbling as papers scattered across the floor, the sound of rustling paper a stark contrast to the silence of the crowd. He bent to retrieve them, knocking his head on the table with a dull thud, the impact echoing through the room. A stifled laugh escaped from the press gallery, quickly hushed by the gravity of the moment. His silk tie, too bright for the occasion, seemed to choke him as sweat glistened on his brow, his once confident demeanor replaced by a frantic desperation. He rifled through his notes, searching for a lifeline, but there was none, each page a reminder of the lie he had built. An assistant whispered something, her voice trembling, but he brushed her off, muttering, "I've got this." He didn't, and everyone in the room knew it. Judge Harper cleared his throat, the sound heavy with finality, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Mr. Steele," he said, his voice low and laced with restrained fury, "do you have anything to add before I proceed?" Victor opened his mouth, then closed it, his once powerful voice failing him, his words swallowed by the weight of his own defeat. Even Mara Ellison had to suppress a faint smile, the corner of her mouth twitching as she watched the man who had tried to destroy her client crumble. The courtroom had watched Victor craft his narrative with arrogance. Now, they watched it collapse, his carefully constructed house of cards tumbling down around him. Judge Harper turned back to the bench, a new silence falling, not of tension, but of reverence, as if the room itself understood the gravity of what was about to happen. He straightened, took a deep breath, the sound filling the chamber, and spoke with the weight of history. Having reviewed the defense's documents, this court finds credible evidence that exculpatory information was deliberately suppressed, violating federal discovery laws. This not only undermines the accused's rights, but stains the integrity of this court and the pursuit of justice. He leaned forward, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. The $500 million judgment against Representative Lena Brooks is vacated, effective immediately. The words hit like thunder, reverberating through the room, shaking the very foundation of the courthouse. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, a dropped notebook clattering to the floor. Did he just... A voice whispered from the back. Yes, he did, another replied, the words barely audible over the rising murmur. Lena closed her eyes, not in triumph, but in quiet acknowledgement of the truth's victory, a single tear escaping down her cheek, catching the light as it fell. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time that day. The weight of the fine lifted, but the burden of her mission heavier than ever. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a spark that would ignite a firestorm of change. Judge Harper continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. This court is not adjourned. Today's events demand we question not just this case, but the system that allowed it to happen. Lena met his gaze, a shared understanding passing between them, a silent vow that this was only the beginning. She wasn't just clearing her name. She was challenging the entire system, and she would not stop until justice was truly served. The next morning, outside the Capitol, a press room buzzed with anticipation, the air electric with the promise of a reckoning. Reporters, cameras, and a crackling energy filled the space, the walls practically humming with the weight of what was to come. At 9:30 a.m., Lena Brooks stepped onto a modest podium, flanked only by a flag and a sign with her name. No fanfare, no script, just her and the truth. The room fell silent as she looked out at the crowd, her voice steady but fierce, each word a declaration of purpose. I know what you expected, she began, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. You thought I'd rage, gloat, or say I told you so. A few nervous chuckles broke the silence, but Lena's expression didn't soften, her resolve as unyielding as ever. I'm not here for that. I'm here for change. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the crowd like a heavy fog. I stand here not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as proof that our justice system can be weaponized if unchecked. Not by error, but by intent, she said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet fury. Her eyes swept the crowd, meeting the gaze of every journalist, every aide, every skeptic. But yesterday doesn't have to end with me. It can start something greater. She took a breath, the sound audible in the stillness, and outlined her vision with a clarity that left no room for doubt. First, mandatory disclosure laws. No more hidden evidence. If it clears someone, it must be shared. Second, real whistleblower protections. No one should fear speaking the truth. Third, a bipartisan judicial oversight board. No more hiding behind politics. Accountability must be public. Her tone was calm, but the emotional weight of her words was undeniable, each syllable a brick in the foundation of a new future. This wasn't about her image. It was about protecting those without a voice, the countless others who had been crushed by the same system that had tried to break her. The silence broke with a single clap, then another, swelling into a standing ovation that shook the room. Reporters, aides, even skeptics stood, moved by the truth, their applause a thunderous acknowledgement of her courage. Lena stepped back to the mic, her eyes shining with purpose, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. Justice shouldn't depend on your wealth or your platform, she said, her words a solemn vow. It should depend on truth. Period. The words landed like a final gavel, a call to action that echoed beyond the room, a rallying cry for a nation desperate for change. The aftermath was swift and seismic, the ripples of Lena's victory spreading far beyond the walls of the Capitol. Within days, DOJ officials were suspended, their careers in tatters as the truth came to light. Headlines screamed across the nation. DOJ, scandal exposed, whistleblower shakes government, each word a testament to the power of one woman's courage. A leaked Zoom clip went viral, its contents a bombshell that shook the nation to its core. A DOJ attorney admitting, "We had to target her, or she'd be unstoppable by midterms." The video racked up 20 million views in mere days, the public's outrage palpable, their voices rising in a chorus of demands for accountability. The House Oversight Committee launched hearings, their gavel strikes a promise of justice, while the Inspector General opened a criminal probe, determined to root out the corruption at the heart of the system. For once, the untouchables face scrutiny, their power no longer a shield against the truth. Judge Nathaniel Harper, known for his reserved nature, broke his silence at a University of Virginia law symposium, his decision to speak a testament to the impact of Lena's fight. What began as a routine Q&A became a moment of reckoning, the room packed with students and scholars hanging on his every word. "The law isn't a tool for the powerful," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his realization. "It's meant to protect, not persecute." His words hung in the air, a solemn vow to do better. Recalling the moment he uncovered the DOJ's deception, his voice cracked, the memory a wound that had yet to heal. He removed his glasses, a tear escaping down his weathered cheek as he admitted, "I've stood by my rulings for years, but this time, I had to stand with the truth." The room was silent, then erupted in applause, the sound a wave of gratitude for his honesty, his vulnerability. That moment, raw and real, made Harper a symbol of judicial integrity, a beacon for those who believed the system could be redeemed. Back in her district, Lena didn't chase the spotlight, her humility a stark contrast to the media frenzy that surrounded her. She returned to her roots, visiting community centers and veterans halls, her presence a quiet promise to those who needed her most. At a small health clinic, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and hope, she listened as an elderly man shared his struggle to access care, his voice breaking as he spoke of son wrongfully imprisoned, the pain etched into every line of his face. When Lena thanked him, her voice soft with gratitude, he took her hand, his grip trembling but firm, and whispered, "I gave up on the system years ago, but you've given me hope." Lena's throat tightened, her nod a silent promise to keep fighting, her heart swelling with the weight of his words. Her real legacy wasn't in Congress. It was in these quiet moments, among those who felt seen for the first time, their voices finally heard. If this could happen to Lena, a congresswoman with resources and a platform, what chance did the powerless have? That question lingered, a haunting refrain that fueled her mission, a reminder of the work that still lay ahead. Months later, Congress passed the Fair Justice Transparency Act, inspired by Lena's reforms, a landmark piece of legislation that would change the course of history. It mandated transparency in federal cases, established an independent review panel, and set strict penalties for concealing evidence, ensuring that no one else would suffer as Lena had. For once, a scandal led to real change. Not just headlines, the law a testament to the power of one woman's courage. Lena didn't bask in the victory, her focus unwavering as she returned to the work that had always driven her. She went back to the places that had shaped her. School auditoriums where the scent of chalk and youthful energy filled the air, local diners where the clink of coffee mugs mingled with quiet conversation, and church basements where the hum of hymnals echoed with hope. She listened to teachers, their voices weary but determined, hugged retirees, their embraces warm with gratitude, and sat with families who'd lost faith in the system, their stories a mirror to her own. Her staff laughed that she skipped more DC luncheons than anyone, preferring to hear from veterans about their struggles at home, their tales of resilience a reminder of why she fought. People didn't meet a hero. They met someone who saw them, someone who understood their pain and refused to let it be forgotten. When asked how she kept going, she'd smile, her eyes crinkling with warmth, and say, "I wasn't fighting for me. I was fighting for us." But Lena remained human, her imperfections a reminder of her authenticity. Minutes before her speech for the transparency bill, she tripped on the Capitol steps, her heel catching on a crack in the stone, scattering her notes and landing hard on the cold marble. The crowd gasped, A collective intake of breath, but Lena sat up, dusted herself off, and grinned, her laughter a bright spark in the tense air. That's what justice feels like sometimes. Messy, with everyone watching, she said, her voice warm with humor. The room laughed, the tension breaking like a wave, then listened as she delivered a speech so raw, so powerful, that even her critics nodded in respect, their skepticism melting in the face of her authenticity. That moment, shared widely online, reminded everyone that strength isn't perfection. It's getting back up, and Lena did so with a grace that inspired millions. Months later, a quote from Lena appeared on posters and classroom walls, its simplicity a testament to her impact. It came from a note she wrote to a middle school civics class, her handwriting a gentle curve of determination. When the powerful tremble because the truth stands firm, that's when justice begins. That simple line captured her journey. Not vengeance, but truth, standing tall, demanding to be heard. In a world where power often bends reality, Lena Brooks' story reminds us that truth doesn't need to scream. It needs only the courage to be spoken, a quiet strength that can move mountains. There comes a moment in every life when we face betrayal, injustice, or the pressure to stay quiet. It's easy to walk away, to think one voice can't matter. But Lena's journey shows us that silence in the face of wrong is complicity. A single voice, rooted in truth, can topple a mountain of lies. She didn't fight with fury. She fought with dignity, evidence, and relentless honesty. So, the lesson is clear. No matter how daunting the system seems, never underestimate the power of standing firm, quietly, truthfully. Because when one person refuses to bow, they pave the way for millions to rise, a ripple that becomes a wave that becomes a movement. What does Lena's story make you think about in your own life? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between silence and speaking up? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how her journey resonates with you. This story is a work of fiction. The characters Lena Brooks and Nathaniel Harper are fictional and do not represent real individuals. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is coincidental, crafted for storytelling purposes only. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're committed to sharing tales like Lena's, stories of courage, resilience, and a human spirit that inspire us to be better. But we can't do it without you. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support can help us reach that milestone today. Don't miss this chance. Subscribe now, comment with your thoughts, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Time is fleeting, and your voice matters. Let's keep these life-changing stories alive together at Daily Narrated Stories.